Good morning, Alex and friends. I'm Grace. Today is Sunday, March 16th, 2025, and you're listening to Alex's News. The weather in Riverside today will be pleasant with a high of 70.2 degrees and a low of 47.7. In today's news, we'll examine how Trump's military actions in Yemen represent a shift in strategy toward dealing with Iran-supported groups. We'll also explore the legal question of whether presidential powers under wartime legislation could be used for deporting gang members. Plus, we'll hear the fascinating story of how NASA astronauts managed during their extended 9-month stay aboard the space station 3 months longer than originally planned. These stories and more coming up on Alex's News. Breaking news this morning, as President Trump has ordered a significant wave of airstrikes against Iran-backed Houthi rebels in Yemen. We're joined by our international correspondent Ethan for more details on this developing story. Ethan, what can you tell us about these strikes that occurred yesterday?
Grace, this is indeed a major escalation in U.S. military involvement in the region. According to NPR, President Trump has vowed to use what he called overwhelming lethal force until the Houthis stop attacking shipping vessels in the Red Sea. The Chicago Tribune reports that yesterday's operation involved the USS Harry S. Truman Carrier Strike Group and the USS Georgia cruise missile submarine, which targeted Houthi bases, leaders, and missile defense systems, primarily in Yemen's capital, Sana'a.
That sounds like a substantial military operation. What prompted such a forceful response from the administration?
Well, Grace, this wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision. According to Perplexity, since November 2023, the Houthis have launched over 100 attacks on merchant vessels in the Red Sea, which is a critical maritime corridor for global trade. They've managed to sink 2 ships, seize another, and kill at least 4 seafarers. The Chicago Tribune reports that the Houthis had recently threatened to resume attacks specifically on Israeli vessels in response to Israel's blockade on Gaza.
I see. So there's a connection to the broader Middle East conflict. What about casualties from yesterday's strikes?
That's where things get murky, Grace. The numbers are disputed. Euronews reports that the Houthi-run health ministry claims at least 31 people were killed, including women and children, with 101 others injured. Meanwhile, NPR cited Houthi claims of 9 civilian deaths, and Perplexity reported that Yemen's Ministry of Health confirmed at least 9 civilian casualties, with 9 injuries. What's clear is that these strikes are further exacerbating Yemen's already dire humanitarian situation.
Speaking of which, can you give us some context about the humanitarian situation in Yemen?
It's absolutely devastating, Grace. According to reporting from Perplexity, Yemen is facing one of the world's worst humanitarian crises, with over 18.2 million people in need of assistance and at least 4 million displaced since 2015. That's roughly half the country's population. Human Rights Watch has called for increased international pressure to address human rights violations and ensure humanitarian access amid this conflict, which has been raging for years now.
This also seems to have implications for U.S.-Iran relations. What's happening on that front?
You've hit the nail on the head there, Grace. President Trump didn't just strike the Houthis. He also issued what NPR describes as a stern warning to Iran to stop supporting these rebels. Trump promised to hold Iran fully accountable for the actions of their proxy forces. Iran's response was swift, as their foreign minister Abbas Araghchi urged the U.S. to halt the strikes, stating that Washington cannot dictate Iran's foreign policy. And General Hossein Salami, head of Iran's Revolutionary Guard, denied any role in setting policies for the Houthi rebels, though the U.S. has long accused Iran of providing military support.
Haven't we seen U.S. strikes against the Houthis before? How is this different?
That's right, Grace. Perplexity reports that previous U.S. military responses to Houthi maritime threats between 2023 and 2025 were largely ineffective in deterring the group's attacks. Despite airstrikes during the Biden administration, the Houthis continued targeting international shipping. What makes this different is the scale and Trump's explicit warning about continued action. A U.S. official indicated to Euronews that these airstrikes are expected to continue, suggesting this isn't a one-off operation, but potentially the beginning of a sustained campaign.
And how have the Houthis responded to these latest strikes?
In what you might call a rebel yell, Grace, the Houthis have vowed to retaliate against the US NPR reports that the group stated the strikes will not deter them from supporting Gaza, which they claim is the motivation for their maritime attacks. According to Euronews, the Houthis are also claiming that Trump's justification for the strikes is misleading. Experts cited by Perplexity warn that a few days of strikes alone may not end the Houthi campaign without more comprehensively targeting their leadership and military capabilities.
Thank you, Ethan, for that comprehensive report on this developing situation. We'll continue to follow this story as it unfolds. This is story 1 of 3 this morning. In a significant legal development, a federal judge has temporarily halted President Trump's controversial deportation plan. We turn now to our legal affairs correspondent Chloe Parker for more on this unfolding story. Chloe, what exactly happened yesterday?
Grace, in what you might call a judicial trump card, U.S. District Judge James Boasberg issued a temporary restraining order yesterday, blocking President Trump's attempt to use a 226-year-old law to expedite deportations of suspected Venezuelan gang members. According to NPR and CNN, the judge even ordered planes that were already in the air to return to the United States. This is quite an extraordinary development.
This involves something called the Alien Enemies Act of 1798. Can you explain what this law is and why it's so controversial in this context?
Absolutely, Grace. This law is certainly alien to modern legal practice. The Alien Enemies Act grants presidents the power to detain and deport non-citizens from hostile nations during times of war or invasion. According to NPR, this is only the 4th time in American history a president has invoked this act, and the first since World War II. Previously, it was used during the War of 1812 against British subjects, during World War I against Germans and Austro-Hungarians, and during World War II when President Roosevelt used it as part of the framework for Japanese internment.
So what makes Trump's use of this law different from those historical examples?
That's the crux of the legal battle, Grace. Unlike those previous applications during formally declared wars, Trump is targeting citizens of Venezuela, a country with which the United States is not at war. CNN reported that Judge Boasberg cited irreparable harm if these deportations proceeded. The fundamental question is whether a criminal gang's activities can legally qualify as an invasion under the terms of this antiquated law.
Tell us more about this gang that's at the center of this controversy.
The gang is called Tren de Aragua, which Trump designated as a foreign terrorist organization back in January, according to NBC News. His proclamation authorized expedited removal of all Venezuelan citizens 14 and older deemed to be members of this gang who aren't U.S. citizens or lawful permanent residents. The administration has argued that Tren de Aragua is conducting irregular warfare against the United States, claiming they've infiltrated Venezuela's government and used drug trafficking as a weapon against America.
Who's challenging this proclamation in court?
According to reporting from multiple sources, the ACLU and Democracy Forward filed a lawsuit on behalf of 5 Venezuelan men. Judge Boasberg initially issued a narrow restraining order for these 5 individuals, before expanding it to cover all non-citizens subject to Trump's proclamation. The Justice Department has already appealed, arguing that the D.C. court lacks jurisdiction in this matter.
What are legal experts saying about this unusual application of such an old law?
They're raising serious concerns, Grace. Catherine Jan Ebright from the Brennan Center for Justice told NPR, "It's a wartime authority, not an immigration authority." Legal analysis from Perplexity API notes that, historically, criminal gangs have not been considered as entities capable of perpetrating an invasion under U.S. law. Critics argue this approach bypasses conventional immigration law and allows for summary deportations without court hearings.
What happens next in this legal battle?
A further hearing is scheduled for March 21st, just 5 days from now. Meanwhile, NBC News reports that Democratic lawmakers have been trying to repeal the Alien Enemies Act altogether. This case really highlights the tension between executive authority in immigration enforcement and constitutional limits on those powers, particularly when invoking wartime measures during peacetime.
A fascinating legal showdown indeed. Thanks for helping us understand this complex issue, Chloe. We'll be watching closely as this story develops. Here are some other headlines. A devastating storm system has ravaged the central and southern United States, claiming at least 32 lives across multiple states. The severe weather, which began on March 14th, has torn through Missouri, Arkansas, Mississippi, Alabama, Texas, Oklahoma, and Kansas. Missouri reported 12 fatalities, while Arkansas confirmed 3 deaths and 29 injuries across 8 counties. In Mississippi, 6 people lost their lives, and Texas reported 4 weather-related deaths. Strong tornadoes struck cities like Rolla and Hartville in Missouri, with a large wedge tornado prompting emergency warnings in southern Missouri. The Storm Prediction Center issued a rare high-risk warning for parts of Mississippi and Alabama, marking only the 3rd ever Day 2 high-risk issuance. Over 250,000 customers lost power across several states, as homes, schools, and buildings were destroyed by the powerful storm system. President Trump has signed an order dramatically reducing staff at Voice of America and other U.S.-funded media organizations. All VOA employees have been placed on paid administrative leave, with notices sent out Saturday morning following the Friday night order. The action also impacts Radio Free Europe, Radio Free Asia, and Radio Marti networks that collectively reach an estimated 427 million people worldwide. These media outlets, established during the Cold War to promote U.S. interests, are overseen by the U.S. Agency for Global Media, an independent agency chartered by Congress. The move could trigger a Supreme Court showdown over presidential power limits, as Congress passed a law in 2020 restricting the authority of presidentially appointed executives at these agencies. A catastrophic environmental disaster has struck Zambia after a tailings dam collapsed at a Chinese-owned copper mine on February 18. Approximately 50 million liters of acidic waste containing heavy metals poured into a stream connected to the Kafue River, Zambia's most important waterway. Dead fish appeared about 100 kilometers downstream, while bird life in the area vanished almost immediately. The spill forced authorities to shut down the water supply to Kitwe, a city of 700,000 people. About 60% of Zambia's population lives in the Kafue River Basin, with 5 million people depending on the river for drinking water. The Zambian government deployed its air force to drop lime into the river to neutralize the acid, while Sinometals Leach Zambia's chairman apologized and pledged to restore the environment. At least 16 people, including 5 women and 5 children, were killed when unexploded ordnance detonated in a metal scrap storage space in Latakia, Syria. The blast, which occurred on the ground floor of a 4-story building, also injured 18 others. This tragic incident highlights the deadly legacy of Syria's 13-year conflict, which has left many areas contaminated with dangerous war remnants. The Syrian civil defense worked overnight to search through debris and recover bodies. The United Nations has been addressing the issue of unexploded ordnance in Syria, safely disposing of over 1,400 devices since December, and identifying 138 minefields across several provinces, including Latakia. An Israeli drone strike killed at least 1 Hezbollah member in southern Lebanon early Saturday morning. The attack targeted a vehicle on the road to Yatr in the Bint Jbeil district, with some reports suggesting 2 operatives were eliminated and another person injured. This incident occurred despite a fragile ceasefire agreement in place since November 2024, following months of cross-border conflict. Lebanese authorities have reported nearly 1,100 violations of this truce by Israel, resulting in at least 87 deaths and over 280 injuries. The ongoing tensions between Israel and Hezbollah continue, as Israel maintains a military presence at several border outposts, despite the ceasefire stipulating withdrawal from southern Lebanon. We turn now to a developing story in space, where after an unexpected 9-month stay aboard the International Space Station, 2 NASA astronauts are finally preparing to come home. Joining us with more details is our science correspondent Ethan. Ethan, this wasn't exactly how these astronauts planned to spend their year, was it?
Not at all, Grace. What was supposed to be an 8-day mission for NASA astronauts Butch Wilmore and Suni Williams has stretched into a 9-month orbital marathon. According to Fox Business, their replacements finally arrived early this morning when a SpaceX crew capsule successfully docked with the International Space Station at 12:04 a.m. Eastern Time.
That's quite the extended business trip. Tell us about these new arrivals who are taking over.
The Crew 10 mission delivered 4 fresh faces to the orbital outpost. NASA astronauts Anne McClain and Nicole Ayers, Japanese astronaut Takuya Onishi, and Russian cosmonaut Kirill Peskov, as Yahoo News reports, citing the Associated Press. They'll spend the next few days getting a crash course, if you'll pardon the unfortunate space puna from Wilmore and Williams, before the latter two finally return to Earth.
So what exactly went wrong that kept these astronauts spaced out for so long?
It all boils down to some serious technical issues with Boeing's Starliner spacecraft, Grace. Wilmore and Williams launched on June 5, 2024, aboard the Starliner for what was supposed to be Boeing's first crewed test flight. But according to reporting from Perplexity, the spacecraft developed multiple problems that ultimately led NASA to make the unprecedented decision to send the Starliner back to Earth empty.
Can you launch into those technical details for us?
The issues were quite significant. First, the Starliner developed helium leaks in its propulsion system. What started as one small leak multiplied into 5 during rendezvous with the ISS. Then there were thruster problems. 5 of the reaction control thrusters didn't operate as expected, with some overheating and producing reduced thrust. Ground tests revealed that heat caused Teflon seals in the thrusters to deform, restricting propellant flow.
That sounds like a real space cadet of a spacecraft. So how are Wilmore and Williams getting home?
They'll be hitching a ride on a SpaceX capsule that's been docked at the ISS since last year. According to Yahoo News, they're scheduled to depart on Wednesday, along with NASA astronaut Nick Hague and Russian cosmonaut Alexander Gorbanov, with a splashdown planned off the coast of Florida, weather permitting.
How have they managed such a long, unexpected stay?
The Indian Express reports that despite the extended mission, Williams and Wilmore have continued their work and don't feel abandoned by NASA. They've been able to utilize the space station's stockpiled supplies and resources. It's worth noting that the ISS is designed for long-duration missions, so while unexpected, the station was equipped to handle additional crew members.
What impact has this had on NASA's commercial spaceflight program?
It's been significant, Grace. As Perplexity reports, NASA continues to evaluate the Starliner's path to system certification. While they haven't ruled out a Starliner flight later this year, any future mission depends on addressing those technical issues. This situation has increased NASA's reliance on SpaceX for crew transportation, with the agency adding more Crew Dragon missions, including Crew 11, scheduled for no earlier than July 2025. That's about 136 days from now.
And how crowded is the space station right now with all these comings and goings?
It's quite the cosmic gathering. According to Yahoo News, there are currently 11 astronauts aboard the ISS, representing the United States, Russia, and Japan. That number will drop to 7 after Wilmore, Williams, Hague, and Gorbanov depart later this week. The new crew is expected to remain on the ISS for approximately 6 months, as reported by the Indian Express.
Well, I'm sure Wilmore and Williams are over the moon about finally coming back to Earth. Thanks for that stellar report, Ethan. That's story 3 of 3 for this segment. That's all we have for now. Today's episode was made by Alexander King, with Claude Sonnet 3.7, Gemini Flash 2.0, the Perplexity API, and the Google Cloud Text-to-Speech API. I hope you have a great day. I'll see you tomorrow, Alex.